Have you been able to identify, as I have, some of the common tactics that they use? People who just have an agenda utilized. I'll list a couple. Whataboutism, misdirection, misrepresentation of fact.
Whataboutism is there, but that doesn't tend to win arguments. What wins arguments is DIP, it's deceptive imagery persuasion. And that's essentially where a bad actor takes a picture that's out of context, makes a claim on that picture. And since, again, people don't really have the life experience to determine whether that picture or that action is correct, they go along with that narrative.
This is The Global Gambit.
Welcome back, everybody. It is part two with Ryan McBeth. And if you haven't seen part one, do go and see part one. It was highly entertaining, where we learned a bit more about who is the man behind the channel, Mr. Ryan McBeth. If you haven't watched it, what are you doing? Pause this one, open a tab and do it. But this one, we're going to talk a little bit more of the subject matter, what Ryan actually covers, some of his actual thoughts. Ryan, I guess, you largely took off your channel because of covering Ukraine, and I want to come later on to that. But early on, one of the things you've really started doing is dispelling debunking disinformation. What's your general experience with that? And why do you think it's quite difficult to do it?
I actually didn't have a lot of experience doing it until I started getting experience firsthand, where people would write me and say, hey, is this true? And the analogy that I give is, let me ask you this. How many goals does a soccer field have?
That would be 2.
How many goals? Well, how do you know that it's 2? How do you know it's 2 goals on a soccer field?
Because there's 2 teams.
Question. How do you know that Okay, but have you played soccer?
Well, I hope so. I'm absolutely terrible at it. But I have given it a go.
You've played soccer. You've walked past a soccer field. You've watched soccer on TV. You know that there's 2 goals. You've seen it on TV. You've played soccer. If I came to you and I said, no, soccer actually has 4 goals, not 2, what would you say to that?
I'd be saying you've been having too many of your whiskey sunshines.
You can do that because you have a baseline of experience. You have played soccer, you know friends that played soccer, you walk past soccer fields, you watch soccer on TV. So most people have never been in the military. So if somebody says, hey, this bombing was a war crime, well, what life experience do they have to prove or disprove that? So they might go ahead and agree with that person's opinion because they don't have the tools in their toolkit to analyze that. So the reason I started getting into the whole debunking disinformation and misinformation is that I did have the tools in my toolkit to say this person is lying or this person doesn't know what they're talking about. And the average person just doesn't have that in their toolkit because they don't play soccer. So that's kind of how I got into the whole thing. I just saw so much of it during the course of my making videos that I realized that there was an opportunity here to say, like, no, this is wrong. And most people just don't know anything about the military except what they learn from video games or movies, so they can be easily misled. They don't play soccer.
Have you been able to identify, as I have, some of the common tactics that they use? I'll list a couple. Whataboutism, misdirection, misrepresentation of facts. These sorts of approaches, if you're ever in a Twitter space or a public setting where you can get into a debate, these seem to be some of the strategies that people who just have an agenda utilize. Are those some of the ones that you've seen, or are there even more that people try to use when they're pushing a pro-Kremlin narrative?
One of the biggest is what I call DIP, or deceptive imagery persuasion. And that's essentially where a bad actor takes a picture that's out of context, makes a claim on that picture. And since, again, people don't really have the life experience to determine whether that picture or that action is correct, they go along with that narrative. A good example, I just did this today. There was a guy who said, look, there was an Israeli airstrike on a bunch of homes. And I took a look at this video and I said, that wasn't an airstrike, that was a controlled demolition. And you could actually see, for a millisecond, you could see this line shoot up toward these houses that were blown up. Well, that was det cord. The average person doesn't know what det cord is, so they see that and they go, "Oh, an Israeli airstrike, they blew up these homes." Well, why are you using det cord? Well, you're using det cord because you put explosives on something. Why'd you put explosives on something? Probably because you found a tunnel complex, and now you're trying to cave in that tunnel. Unfortunately, there's houses over top of those tunnels. So, in a case like that deceptive imagery persuasion, where someone says one thing, but the truth is actually something else, and you take a video out of context, that's probably the most common thing that I see. Whataboutism is there, but that doesn't tend to win arguments. What wins arguments is DIP. It's deceptive imagery persuasion, where most people, they don't know what they're looking at, so they just kind of go along with whatever was said in this particular deceptive video.
But the thing about that, though, I've seen, if you're, active on X or Twitter, but what they tend to do, I notice, is they will share an image or a footage extract, and they will then be commented on by other people saying, well, this is actually from 2013 and the Syrian civil war. And they'll go, yes, I know it is, but it still illustrates the hypocrisy and et cetera, of the West. Therefore, it still is valid. What? Have you come across this? Can you explain this thought process, this logic here? Because it's sort of like, for me, it's so lateral thinking.
I can tell you exactly why they're doing it. It's because they've created a narrative. They've created a narrative, and the problem is that the narrative is so extreme that they have to keep coming up with more and more extreme stuff. So it's kind of like a person, if they lie and they have to cover up that lie and then tell another lie to cover up that lie. The problem is that there is a limited amount of footage or situations that can increase engagement. And at some point, your followers expect more stuff. So you have to keep giving that to them. So it's very easy to take a look at a bombing from 2013 and pass that off as, look at what the Ukrainians did to the Russians. They blew up these Russian prisoners. And when someone points out, well, this is actually from the Syrian civil war, you don't suffer any consequences from it because you've already kind of hooked them in to the narrative. So if you make a mistake or two and you don't own up to that mistake, it doesn't really cost you anything. Because enough people believe in the lie already, but you need to keep feeding them those lies. It's like doing some kind of illegal drug. You get hooked on that feeling. You get hooked on the feeling of indignance or anger. And if you're not getting that daily dose of anger, that's a problem. So you got to give them that daily dose of anger. And maybe once in a while, the stuff that you give them has been cut with baking powder, and they don't get that complete high. They know another high is coming. So that might be why you see that.
No, I think it's a good point. It is substance over, anything that involves rationale, logic, instead of emotionality and impulsivity is going to fail. I mean, Brexit is a case in point. We lost the vote because the other side we should have engaged in a bit of emotionality, but emotionality still based on fact and substance, evidence. But for me,
wasn't Brexit really about tea? Because from what I understand, everyone in England has a tea kettle that can make tea in is about bananas?
It was about bananas. Because basically Boris Johnson tried to use the analogy that our bananas were becoming straightened because of EU law, and tea was also part of that we'd have to use different types of tea bag material, which would affect the quality of British tea, and therefore we want to leave the EU because our bananas are going to become straight and our tea bags are going to become less. It was basically playing into the cultural norms and British exceptionalism.
I thought over here, I could have sworn it was about how the EU had rules about kettles and how kettles had to be energy efficient. And I guess British kettles that can boil water in 10 seconds. or something, and the EU wouldn't allow that. And so,
oh no, for sure, it was to do with a mixture, and adherence to EU guidelines and regulation, and the Conservative Party or members of the Conservative Party took that to the extremes of saying, "Well, you won't be able to have your bananas." It's a famous thing, but what do we do then in the sense of if people are so easily won over through just emotional triggers? And one of the things that confuses me most is that people don't even want to see depth or detail. So when one of the people that we've mentioned shares an image of a horrendous situation, even if it's from 20 years ago, they don't add any. People aren't asking questions like, is this genuine? Where was this? Why can't I find sources? There's no sort of evidence. It's just a provocative picture and a sensationalist statement. Why is that so effective?
That's a good question. I mean, it could just be as simple as people like to be on a team, right? People like to. If I was actually trying to come up with a Washington Wizards analogy, but all of our players are crap. But all right, well, except Gafford. All right, so if Gafford, makes a sick dunk, right? Or Gafford, go Gafford arms. Gafford makes an amazing block. So that could be the equivalent of just those "Go Team Go" rallying cry posts that you see in the NBA. Like, yeah, we lost the game, but go Gafford arms. So
people are
that might be it.
So people are so already set in their ways that they don't need additional confirmation or persuasion. It's been made, and they just want this. As you said earlier, like a reignition of their anger,
or it's that dopamine hit. I'm sure that there's people who watch, Ronaldo just scored a goal, or and the team might have lost the game, but he scored a goal. It's a miracle inside. I've been to a couple of soccer games. I have no idea what's going on, and it seems like the players are all so good that it's a miracle they score a goal in the first place. So I can understand why people are so excited when their team actually scores a goal. So maybe it's that go team go. Look, we scored a goal that I think people are looking for there.
Well, that's just how I felt when I watched the President's run during the Washington Nationals baseball. I got my dope hit watching the big-headed.
Yeah.
It's one of the hilarious things, and I'm just sitting there like, as a Brit, should I agree with this? I actually pivoting then from that, it kind of builds on nicely. You've done a lot of work in open source intelligence, so that's for context for people. That's where people across the internet have been working on publicly available information like satellite imagery, geolocation, that sort of thing, to debunk BS, be it in the Israeli-Gaza situation or in the Ukraine war, particularly in the context of Russia's claims about Ukrainian X, Y, and Z. How have you found that expand and its role in helping to dispel? Because I think it's been a cornerstone of helping Ukraine in the past almost 2 years.
Really, that's a tough question to answer. So, how have I dispelled the information? Boy,
how have you? I'll rephrase it. How have you felt that the emergence of open source intelligence, which has been around for a while, I mean, Bellingcat had been around, but how do you think it's really helped you grow your ability to help in the war against, on one side of this war and against another? That didn't seem to help.
That's a good question. I think that I didn't think, I wasn't expecting that, because there's just so many things I could say to that it's a really tough question to answer. It's almost like a chicken or the egg thing, in the sense that it has to be open source, because the traditional means of intelligence gathering, such as SIGINT, HUMINT, we don't have that. We don't have that in public, and I couldn't share that information with people anyway. Right. So anything you hear inside of a SCIF, inside of a sensitive compartmentalized information facility, anything you hear inside that, you can't really bring out of the SCIF. Right. So naturally, everything that the public can consume is open source and unclassified. Although open source doesn't necessarily mean unclassified. I think that the information that people can get today can only be open source because that is what is generally available to people. So I guess I wish I could give you a better answer to that question, but it's almost like you're seeing it today just because the internet is so big and has basically every bit of human knowledge that if you want to know the size of the Russian army, you can Google the size of the Russian army, which might give you an estimate, or you can find contracts on Russia's military website that detail where they post contracts asking for manufacturers of boots. And if they have a contract for 2,000 boots, Russia's gonna bring on 1,000 conscripts this year. So that can help give you the size of the Russian army. But it's not that OSINT has become popular. It was always there. It's just there's an easier way to collect that information now. Does that answer your question?
I'm almost proud of myself for stumping you a little bit because you're such a depth of knowledge on your channel and, giving us all so many things to think about. As you said, smarter every day.
Smarter every day?
Yeah, smarter every day. I'm glad to have made you have to properly think about something. But that's a small achievement for me. I think building on that then, me personally, I come from a quite particular background. I studied at SAIS in DC. I focused on policy. I work at the big picture geopolitics, strategy, the grand strategy versus you, which are more about the tactical, the military, which I all appreciate, but I've never served. But I think both are very important. But largely speaking, I think you do a really good job of connecting these technical issues, big worldly issues, to everyday individuals who are interested but don't necessarily have the time nor obsession like we do to dive into it. Why do you think academia is going wrong, and why do you think the open source or versus academia, what could change so that we can do a better job of making these things more accessible to people to understand?
I don't know. I don't know if I can fix academia. I wasn't really aware that academia had a problem.
It's very
I think I graduated from college 20 years ago, so I really wouldn't know. But although I got my MSc in cybersecurity, but usually like in the technical side of the house, like we're not worried about wokeism. Like we're just like, all right, does it compile? Like it's not like you're racist if you don't compile. Like it doesn't work like that. In the software world, it works or it doesn't. I don't know how to answer that question. You stumped me again. Really, one of the biggest issues that I can think of, if there is a disconnect, it's that nobody serves in the military anymore. So again, they don't have that baseline of understanding that can help guide decisions.
No, if you don't have a defense secretary or defense minister that hasn't served, or even just been a reservist, then how on earth can you say that they've got a field-based appreciation for what it takes?
I think you can still have an appreciation even if you don't serve, or even if you are a reservist. There's plenty of reservists who get deployed. That's not that much of an issue. I think the problem is when you don't really have a boots on the ground understanding, which you can gain in other ways, of the average problems of a soldier. When you don't have that level of appreciation, I think it might be tougher to understand the bigger picture.
But building on that, though, because you started out with Ukraine, and there are a couple of questions after this one, but you've also branched out into Sudan. Obviously, now a lot of Israel, Palestine. I think you even did a couple of things to do with Niger. Mm-hmm. Have you seen any variations in terms of when you're covering those versus the global north or European, that sort of thing?
I've seen more similarities than variations. The similarity are drones. we're seeing countries like Ethiopia use drones, like against the Tigray people in northern Ethiopia.
Azerbaijan beat
with Armenia in in just a couple of weeks, I should say, mainly using drones. The second Nagorno-Karabakh.
Are you talking about the Nagorno-Karabakh late last year, or the one in 2020? Because there's been a few skirmishes.
Well, both, really. And late last year, that was 48 hours. They essentially kicked the Armenians, what was left of them, out of that territory. But they had invested quite heavily in Turkish drones. And I think that the one, I haven't noticed a lot of variations, but the similarity, the one common thread is the use of drones. And that's something that has changed warfare to the point where you can buy a cheap DIJ drone, and you can, if you take the solenoid, if you take the button that turns the light on and off in that drone, you hook that up to a solenoid. Now you can drop something. So you put 5 volts. That's how they did. That's how initially the Ukrainians were doing it. They were just taking a drone, and the drone had a light, and that light essentially was a 5-volt switch, off on. And they just took the light off. They put a solenoid on that thing. They put that solenoid had an arm that grabbed that released a mortar bomb or a VGO 17 grenade. I probably got the name of that wrong. A 30 millimeter grenade. When they hit the light button on that drone, it just opened the solenoid opened, and the mortar round fell. And just by doing that, they gained a surveillance advantage, and they gained a harassment advantage over Russia.
But thanks, Ryan. It's been awesome. But everyone, thank you for enjoying part 2. Be sure to check out part 3. If you enjoyed it, please, give the thumbs up. Go check out Ryan. I look forward to seeing you in the next episode. But take care.